Good evening, Yasmin and Joseph. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to hear what Gail, David, and Paul have to say. You know, it's been, there's been a lot of changes, and we have to think about whether those are going to continue and expand. One thing I just want to mention is my internet seems to be a little unstable. So I may stop the video. So you may hear a voice without a, I may have to go on if my internet isn't working. But, you know, during this period of COVID, Health Canada and the FDA are really hustling. They're moving a lot faster because they have to. And
I guess it's going to be camera time off soon.
Occupational hazard, you know, this is these things happen.
Not only for COVID, for other disease states, and maybe also, again, just giving a preview, how AI and biomarkers may also help speed up the whole drug development processes here. And Gail, maybe you want to start with some of your views and what you're seeing.
Thanks, Cheryl. Certainly from OBIO's members, we are seeing some companies pivot, taking existing technologies and ensuring that they have an application in COVID-19 settings to provide some support to patients in the pandemic. We've had 8 companies enroll in OBIO's Early Adopter Health Network program, and I think 5 of those are companies that have pivoted their technologies to address COVID-19 applications. One of the companies, Flowsonics Medical, has just received expedited approval from Health Canada for their flow patch for use in a COVID-19 setting. And other companies are frantically, of course, working to develop diagnostics and vaccines. We see a real shift towards diagnostics and interest from investors in diagnostics, and there seems to be, as a result of COVID-19 applications, the spin-on benefit of investors taking a look at all sorts of diagnostic tools. And of course, our digital health companies are benefiting from the move to virtual care and the changes in billing codes that are permitting certain physician-patient interactions virtually now. And of course, all these companies have their fingers crossed that these opportunities will remain in place even post-pandemic. So I'll leave it there and let some others pick up the ball.
And you talked about a number of companies pivoting. So what I'm seeing is there are a number of companies pivoting, but there are also a number of companies on the negative that say they're pivoting, and these are some public companies. And what I have seen is the SEC and the OSC has been tracking down companies that are public to make sure that it's not just promotional, because everyone's very excited in the stock market about COVID and so forth. All you do is put out a press release and your stock goes through the roof.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of issues regarding that, but the good is that there are a number of companies that are really devoting a lot of resources to helping find some treatments and vaccines, and there's a lot of good science here going on in Canada. David, maybe from
And
You're-
Cheryl, it just maybe while your internet's wonky, I can just add and give David a chance while your internet comes back. One thing that we've observed during the pandemic, we've had some webinars with investors and companies, and the investors have expressed concern about companies that have pivoted to a COVID-19 application for their technology, because the investors are saying, well, that's all well and good, but that's not what I invested in. So that's sort of the other side of what you were describing. It looks like you're back now, Cheryl, so I'll let you continue.
No. So David, want to hear about what you're seeing and any observations?
Thanks, Cheryl, and thanks everyone for the chance to share our perspective. I think there's lots of different perspectives. It's such a crazy time for the world, this COVID, and it's, I think, infected every part of our health translational system. So wasn't there a publication, I don't know if it was in New England Journal or a prominent journal, where the title was Up is Down or something like that, that referred to the push by regulatory authorities to accelerate a vaccine, while pharmaceutical companies were saying slow down and we're going to make sure we do these clinical trials correctly. It certainly is the reverse of what we usually see, trying to push the regulators. But I think, like I said, there's or like has already been said, there's been lots of groups pivoting, and we've seen that. Even a question marks for ourselves. Our group is affiliated with the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, so we're thinking about translation all the time, and have obviously a lot of research tools that we apply to cancer, and we've taken some of those on the informatics side and genomics side and applied them to COVID and sequencing and so forth. And there's, to be fair, an internal debate as to how much that pivot should be, and how much should we be looking to solve these short-term problems and not lose the focus on cancer, because we're going to have to deal with cancer, hopefully, and that's kind of a weird expression, but cancer is certainly going to be a problem for a much longer period of time, hopefully, than COVID. But I think that there's lots of parts of the healthcare system that have been pushed as a result of COVID. And I think it's raises a lot of questions that I think can be taken forward in other fields. And some of those have been led by oncology already with biomarkers or accelerated development, and now are really being put to the test. So I think it's an exciting time, but not without sort of a certain degree of chaos that goes along with a lot of unregulated testing, private testing in the United States, and also exposing some of the shortcomings of our own healthcare system for diagnostic tests and coordinating that with private payers and the like. So it's a mixed bag, but it's certainly shaken things up, and for the better, I think, in the long run.
I think I think you're right, and I think we could see some real change because, as you see, investors and this, I think, is the drug innovation, health innovation is, and that, in terms of Canada versus the US, how much we should continue to take a back seat. I know that initially, and maybe Paul, you can comment on this or anything else you want to comment. I know initially, we were doing things at a very fast pace, but I'm wondering if now that things have sunk in, and we're not just talking about PPE, but we're talking about drugs and vaccines, that Health Canada may do what it normally does, which is take a back seat to the FDA. And, whether that is something that should be sustainable, and maybe we can talk about that a little more. Paul, you've had so much experience in this area. I'm sure you have a lot of interesting thoughts about this.
Yeah, I'll pick you up on your last idea, but at the end, the first few thoughts are, disruption brings opportunity. That's the first thing that is taught to entrepreneurs, both as having built a couple of my own companies, having helped some of my students build theirs, and now as director for the Health Innovation Hub, helping companies build their opportunities. This is the message I'm relaying to them, and I think it's a message that is, now that we're 6 to 8 months, probably 8 months, I guess now, into this, is being borne out. One of the companies that I'm CSO for, Ripple Therapeutics, is in the midst of closing pretty major deal. So companies are raising funding. Many of our own H2I companies have raised during this period, and while yes, some companies have pivoted, our advice to the companies have been to stay true to your business strength. And if COVID turns out to be a super opportunity for you to leverage and validate your technology, then by all means take advantage of it, because the number of opportunities in terms of leveraging up have are significant, and can really accelerate your path forward. For many of the students who are in the classroom, you should know that the number of new startups has not receded at all. Our rate of intakes on new ventures is about 2 to 3 a week. New ideas coming about. I think companies are moving ever faster through our 4-level program up into level 3, which is typically where they start to monetize. And people are adapting. The entrepreneurial community is adapting, which means job creation and new economy will grow. And if there's one thing COVID has created is chaos, and identified the needs for, as was said earlier, shortcomings, but also missing technologies. And so that's, I believe, is what's contributing to a lot of the spark on the innovation, for driving new companies into place, for new tools, new assets to allow the health community to better adapt to the changes, and also identifying the weaknesses that we're sitting in our very fragile healthcare system, which of course brings identification of new opportunities, new needs, and therefore new companies. The nice thing about running an early stage incubator is that we're plastic. The companies that are coming in are very fresh on ideation, and can pivot or move in a direction pretty fast. And of the 130 companies that we were coaching at the time that COVID hit, 30 of them immediately seized the opportunity to be able to capitalize on their focused plans in the areas of not only PPEs, but diagnostics, new drug therapies, and communication tools, which have been really critical for frontline workers. I think in terms of your question with regards to Health Canada and FDA, and Health Canada takes second back role, I think this has been a real shot in the arm for how Canada thinks and sees itself as an innovator, not just as a place where we do great discovery, but as a place that can actually build products and resources currently right now to fulfill the immediate needs of Canada. But I think we will realize coming out of this, we will be able to put those in play on a global market. So I actually think Health Canada will continue. This will be an awakening call for them, and for the placement of new and additional resources in it to be able to keep up to the innovation economy that's growing in Canada. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. Just this afternoon, I got a call from an ex-postdoc of mine who was being recruited by Health Canada to do drug evaluations. They have an expansion of a group coming into play as a result of what's going on. So I think that's a validation as to how I see Health Canada is going to position themselves in supporting the economy relative to the FDA as we move forward here.
And just to dig down on that topic a little more, one of the issues, the FDA has thousands of employees, and therefore they have a lot of expertise that Health Canada we don't have that level of employees and expertise here. So, one of the questions is, I think one of the things we've learned here is we need to have a little independence, but maybe it would working together, which in most cases FDA's review and approval, and then only afterwards does its own approval because simply doesn't have the resources. And Gail, I mean, you represent a lot of companies, and you work a lot with government and lobbying on issues, and just wanted to get your sense of what you think about this subject.
And I'll just apologize, Cheryl. I didn't hear your whole question because of internet issues. So I'm going to take the liberty of answering the part of it that I did hear, and I'll just fill in the rest. So last week, Obio launched its report, Leading the Pack, Accelerating the Success of the Canadian Health Science Industry. And we had 220 respondents from across Canada. The majority of them were in Ontario. And we asked them a number of questions around regulatory process, reimbursement process, and so on. Interestingly, one of the data points was how many industry leaders of both pre-revenue and revenue generating companies said they actually just didn't understand the process of how to get a product approved for market here in Canada. And as you alluded to, a lot of companies go to the FDA first, or think they have to go to the US as their first market. So that came through in our report. Part of it is they just don't take the time to early on to understand the Canadian regulatory process, but they could, they know the US process inside and out. But there is an opportunity for us to clarify for Canadian companies what the process is to get their product approved and purchased in Canada. If we can make that pathway well understood and clear and demonstrate how easy it is, then maybe more companies will take that journey. But certainly, from the feedback that we had, the respondents to our work didn't necessarily see Health Canada so much as a bottleneck as they just saw it as being opaque. We do know from other work that we've done that the manpower, the people power, the resource issue at Health Canada is one that many companies have addressed, and that I understand that Health Canada is working to address as well.
I mean, the question is, would it be, and I asked this as a question because I don't know, but would it make sense for Health Canada to explore more of a relationship like the EMA is very coordinated in Europe? Would it be worthwhile to explore a more coordinated relationship with the FDA, given their level of resources and given that we really don't want to be far behind? And I combine this with the fact that we're looking at some changes for PMPRB on pricing that will at the same time no longer look to the US market for pricing guidelines and the expectations that the price than in the US, and actually put the Canadian Canadian patients at a disadvantage of being able to access drugs. Maybe given some thought to or have some views on.
There's a lot of angles there to what you had said, but one of the things that I know is for sure for a fact is that there's actually working committees that have been set up in Health Canada specifically to move dialogue between the two agencies. So I think some of the resources that you were talking about are there. I think it does boil down to a manpower issue at the end of the day. We're a country of 38 million trying to put the same number of products on the market in Canada as they are in the US. So it's a daunting task. And I think they are in certain areas definitely having conversations already with the FDA. So we just need to figure out how to do things more efficiently on a smaller GDP. That's the strategy, and it's not clear to me if that whole conversation's going on. But that's what will have to happen because it's an equation that you can't change unless we somehow magically manage to magnify our GDP by tenfold on the population base that we have. Maybe that's a good goal to set with our healthy economy, but that's a pretty high gold medal bar.
Thank you. And so, Paul, you had mentioned that your startups are going forward. And frankly, in my practice, I see that there's been so much money. I mean, this has been a record year for money raising in the biotech area. It's been off the charts. I've never had, I mean, I had a client recently asked me, what do you think an average Series A round should be? How big? And if you asked me a few years ago, I might say between 10 and $20 million. Now I'm routinely reading about $100 million plus Series A. And I'm wondering in terms of what you're seeing and whether you think this level of activity is going to continue.
David, you want to? I got some ideas, but I don't want to take up all the airspace here. And I know David's area is right in this biologicals field, which is driving a lot of those big numbers. So we'll let him take a first kick at the can here.
All right, thanks, Paul. Well, Cheryl, you're just hitting a whole bunch of hot topics here, like the FDA, Health Canada, drug reimbursement, and PMPRV. Like these are all juicy topics that we could chat about for quite some time. And I guess I'll get to that the latest most question in a second, but just on that last one, I think from Canada's perspective, we've looked at this. I don't know what the analogy is, like a fencer, where we take stabs with our sword in our individual pockets that actually don't really all connect. So, for instance, as Gail was mentioning, how do we get products on the Canadian market? Well, is that a driver for some biotechs? Well, maybe it should be, and maybe it isn't. And so, is reimbursement really connected to economic development? Do we want pharma engaged in Canada? Well, they're mostly multinationals. So what does Canada get in return? Is healthcare a economic engine, or is it simply a cost to be borne? There's all these connections that we look at from a siloed basis of how do we solve individual problems. And I think we're just operating in a structure that hasn't really thought about healthcare in a holistic way. And as a result, you see this major disconnects that occur and will probably recur for some time until crises like this, really wake up the health system, whether it's our own proprietary intellectual property or whether it's our own supply of PPE and the like. There's lots of things that Canada will need to adopt and change in healthcare. So I think those are all good topics, and we'll have to have another session to cover them all. But but I guess with respect to the startups, certainly in the therapeutic space, we've seen, some of those, and we're playing on a much smaller. Our investments tend to be in the $1 to $5 million. So we're still, if we're going to syndicate, we'd be in that Series A to Series A stage, and on a much more modest scale. And I think obviously groups in Canada like Versant have evolved into a much bigger A round with the goal of owning a platform space and providing enough momentum to the business to attract the right management and scale to allow it to execute without thinking about the next financing needs, and then also to try to capture as much value from an investment standpoint at a lower valuation and put that capital to work. I think other sectors outside of biotech have seen, there was one just on the other night on the Dragon's Den, a guy with a dog walking app, and he was sort of the Uber for dog walking, and he compared it to WeWag or whatever it was in the in the States that raised $100 or $500 million. So I think you're going to see a number of these companies where the capital exceeds the needs, and I think there's also an interest in some Canadian biotechs to raise more modest amounts of capital, do more of it locally, and be successful despite the advantages. But that isn't always going to work, because clearly things like in the diagnostic space where you have Grail, raising $1 billion, that actually alters the marketplace entirely just from the type of business that you can do with $1 billion. So there's different extremes arising, and I think multiple financing paths can be successful. But there's definitely a trend, and it's a positive one overall, of more cash going into the sector.
Talking of Grail, as you know, one of the biggest chunks of money came from CCPIB. So it's not like we don't have the money here in Canada. You're right, the big money is always thought to come from the US, but in that case, CCPIB did the $350 million crossover round. But Paul, getting back to medical devices and diagnostics, because I think David really hit it on the head by saying, there's so many different topics here, and maybe we need to think about where we need more coordination with the US and where we need more independence. Maybe on the drug side, when there's so much at stake and so much money that's required, maybe more coordination. But we saw when the government needed PPE and ventilators, we had companies here in Canada that were selling all over the world, but couldn't sell not one product here in Canada. So when the government came to these companies and said, hey, we have a humongous order for you, and they only had a few employees here in Canada, we got ourselves in a bind. And whether the government needs to support these local industries so that for products that don't require, so that there can be more local industry when we're talking about things like PPE and medical devices, and just wanted to get your thoughts about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, a few perspectives that I have on there is one, first of all, Canada absolutely can't afford to not be in the healthcare sector as an industry sector, regardless of what its past is. And that is because we spend, roughly 10 to 12% of our national GDP on healthcare. We would never consider of not being, in the wheat and the oil business, based on their relative GDP consumption in this country. So why would we do that for healthcare, especially given the prominence of discovery that goes on in this country? And there's been report after report for the past 2-3 decades by external international experts bewildered by the fact as to why Canada has not capitalized on this gold mine that it's sitting on. So I think, having arrived here in Toronto in 1993, when I could count on my hands the de novo company startups existing in the ecosystem in comparison to now is dramatic, and we are certainly still very small relative to the US, but it is not a reason for the federal and provincial governments to recognize the amazing opportunity that we have to capitalize on the fact that our neighbors are so close, and that we are so integrated with them on so many aspects, and that so many of our entrepreneurs are extremely familiar with what they have to do in the US, and it would be, and they're in the driver's seat in terms of opportunity to bring and catalyze these activities in Canada. David hit the nail right on the head. The dialogue has to be ramped up. It has to be coordinated. And it's not as if there's not other jurisdictions in the world, small jurisdictions in the world that have achieved this. Ireland, Spain, some of the Norwegian countries have become pretty significant powerhouses in unique areas of healthcare technology sector. But it took a national agenda to drive it. And we have to drive a national agenda, which is an easy thing to say when you have part of the country still wanting to relive the glory days of the 1930s in drilling petroleum out of the ground, when there are so many other amazing opportunities at our fingertips in this country in terms of innovation and technology. So to me, that's, I hope we emerge out of COVID-19 with a desire to drive the agenda forward and to have a coordinated conversation and see coordinated action on this.
So Paul, I think that's very insightful. And, you know, the hope is that maybe this gives politicians cover to invest in this health innovation, because as you know, it's a very long process and politicians need to give quick results. And Gail, this is something that you're very close with because you work with government a lot, but I'm hoping that now, you know, they will get that cover from the population. Question is that people have very short memories, but Paul, as you said, I think I would paraphrase liberties, Saudi Arabia, since the Gulf states are buying up healthcare innovation right now, so that they don't lag, right? So we're sending we're sending people from UHN and Sick Kids and all the hospitals, our best people over there to teach them. They're now taking people from, UAE and Israel. And the last thing we want to do is be a poor Saudi Arabia when we really have all this great innovation. So Gail, getting back to what the political framework is right now and the openness, is this a good time to really push the agenda right now? Or is everyone just so busy trying to fix the COVID problem? Can they not take a look at the bigger picture?
I think there is something to be said for the fact that all levels of government are very focused on COVID right now, to try to get a meeting with anybody in government that isn't offering them some sort of a solution that's COVID related is very difficult. But it's, as you've said, it's how we manage this going forward beyond the pandemic and take advantage of the opportunity to become a pillar of the economy here in Canada. We're 35 million people. There's, I think one of the things that came out of our research is we need to stop thinking about ourselves as a small market. Lots of companies would be very interested in having a share of a 35 million population market for their technology. But compared to the US, as an industry, we represent 0.45% of the GDP, of Canada's GDP, whereas in the US, the health science industry represents 4% of the US GDP. And that's our challenge, is to become a bigger slice of the global market, and make a bigger contribution to our Canadian GDP. And certainly, I can tell you that last week when we launched our report, we had a number of government stakeholders participate in the call and follow up with us, both federally and provincially. And while the research that we released talked about the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the majority of the research was what are we going to do post-pandemic, and how are we going to help companies succeed faster. But certainly, the key issues that we were addressing, were awareness, in addition to speed and access to markets.
And
But
so
to
we
the
get-
point on policy, though, just to dovetail right on the backside while we're on the topic and with Gail's comments, to dovetail on the importance of governments to be having the conversation right now, is that we're seeing a lot of Canadian companies go to Australia. Australia has always been viewed as a great model for a great benchmarker against Canada. Our dollar value is similar, our culture is similar, and yet our companies are going down there to do clinical trials because of something that the government has decided it would do. It would attract companies to do first-in-man clinical trials down there. It would support it with its hospital network. It would give it great tax incentives. And then once they're there, the product is effectively launched in that country, approved in that country, launched in that country, and becomes part of their market, regardless if they decide to take it and go to the US next, which most of them will do, right? But not in this country. Not in this country. For some odd reason, if you're going to do clinical trials in this country, it's a knock at the door and it's a start at zero in conversation with each of those facilities when you get them going. And I know there's a couple of initiatives afoot on the ground, but all they are very small pilot studies, 3 million, 4 million here, trying to put together a group of hospitals that try to connect our companies hooked up together. But the tax incentive system, the initiatives that could truly be driven by government will are not there. We're not even having the conversation, So there's
one advantage of the Australian tax incentives as well is that they will give credit for work that's done outside of Australia, if it has to be done outside of Australia, which is something that our SHRED program, for example, could take on, and it would make a meaningful difference for companies. And everything's global, and not all of the work necessarily can be done here, and that's that's part of the holistic approach that Australia has taken.
And Gail, I mean, even more so is most countries try to encourage foreign investment. So if you get too much U.S. money, if you get too much investment from the U.S. or from any place outside of Canada, you lose your reimbursable SHRED credits, your enhanced SHRED credits. So
yeah, that's just ridiculous. It's not. They've got to get with the times on some of these criteria, and capital is fungible. If our companies can do a good job of attracting it here, our job
makes no sense, right?
Our job is to keep it here, right, and to incentivize capital to build the companies here, to make it what everybody calls sticky capital, and that message is starting to get through. And I, those are conversations that we're having with all levels of government. And it was a contributor to a bio being funded by the federal government for our early adopter hospital network, was just advancing those kinds of arguments to people in the federal government. And positioning this, if we, you know, as a way to get companies adopted into the healthcare system, to get them commercialized here, develop key opinion leaders here, all those good things, so that they can go to the global market. And as we've built, you know, our understanding of how venture capital and investors think, we've asked them these questions. If we could give you a reason to leave the company here, because they can iterate their technology here, they can access the healthcare system here, they can develop key opinion leaders, they can accelerate the time to market by working within the healthcare system here. Is that a reason to leave a company here? And they say yes. They have no profound reason why they want to pull a company out of Canada. But if they view Canada as a hostile market, good science in a hostile market, then that outcome's pretty clear. But good science in an ecosystem that supports the pathway to market, then leaving the company to stay here and grow here becomes a compelling argument. At least it's one that's worth a shot.
And following on that, and just Paul, getting back to your comment about clinical trials, I would think it would be a huge advantage to do clinical trials here, particularly because of the way our hospitals are set up. So that, if you have a severe cancer problem, you're going to Princess Margaret here in Ontario. If you're, if it's a even in are all doing the same things. Here, I would think there would be a lot of advantages because this healthcare system has already organized it. Paul, is that correct or not? Or what am I missing?
Well, provincially, yes. But as you know, we can move across this, even though we have public health care across Canada, the way that public health care is accessed and where its priorities are changes in its openness to enable innovative young companies to be able to use it early on into their first in human trials is not equally accessed everywhere. That is the reality of the situation. Why it's like that, I don't know. David or Gail may have a better perspective on this, but that is what we have observed. I know the very first company that we launched here in Canada did its first products actually in Canada. And you know where our first hospital centers were? They were not downtown in the big research hospitals of the Toronto GTA. They didn't want to tell of anything at all about this product made in Canada. It was a little hospital in Saskatchewan, one in Nova Scotia, Ottawa, BC, and I forget where the fifth one was. So that leaves you scratching your head as to how fragmented. Well, I think it leads to the conclusion as to how fragmented the policies and practices are when they don't have to be for exactly the reasons that you said a minute ago. David, I'm not sure how close you are to, don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know what you guys do at Facet, so you probably have perspective on this yourself, given that the example given here was related to cancer specifically.
Well, I don't know whether to say "don't get me started," Paul, and that might be the best response there. But I think there's lots of things, and I think it relates back to, we often have these discussions like we are here with a lot of group that think about the value of healthcare and the potential for innovation in that space, and yet we're kind of in our own little bubble because what we don't have is don't think people have experienced that healthcare can be. They haven't gone to Kendall Square. They haven't gone to San Diego and San Francisco and said, "Wow, you mean this whole thing can actually give jobs to my children and grandchildren and create opportunities?" They haven't had that exposure. We just submitted a 5-year strategic plan. Not to go too far off tangent, but one of the anecdotes I referred to was, when we discovered insulin, we gave it away for $1, and people know this story, of course, in Toronto. And I think there really is a deep cultural issue that we need to overcome, where profiting from healthcare is a bad thing. And I think that Canadians need to embrace that entrepreneurial element that we've been fueling our science into American startups for a long time. And I think it has to infect the entire system, right from the taxpayers knocking on the door of government saying, why aren't we doing more to get more out of our health system? And the same thing, to be fair to our universities, why don't we have policies at our universities that provide a 10% overhead charge to any kind of small startup that's coming? Why don't we make it conducive? Why don't we run clinical trials at our hospitals where they're run at cost plus 10% for any kind of local entrepreneurial startup? These are things that are easy elements that can be added once somebody thinks about the entrepreneurial opportunity for Canadians to actually develop their own products. And so right now, we don't actually have the right incentives at the highest levels, universities and healthcare, that are aligned with being entrepreneurial and supporting innovative products. And so I think until we get there, and I think part of that is we need to have do a better job of selling, not to government, but selling to the people of Ontario and Canada what healthcare can do if you actually make it work for you instead of just being a cost center. And that's a big cultural shift. But it's one that would lead to those types of discussions, and that we just scratch our head saying, why can't we run these clinical trials cheaper? And we'll give some in-kind contribution or in-kind equity to the hospital that helps support it. Those receptors aren't there right now because we've thought of healthcare as a silo that we just spend money on.
Yeah, systemic analysis of the system is absolutely needed, so that that we can do the math and show the impact. It's a story that I tell all the time. We're in the midst of a $130 million advancement raise to help the ecosystem fill in blank holes. And the story I tell the university leads, who tell me, well, the nature of our business is education. And I keep on reminding them, yes, it is education, and we have a 21st century. And if you create a co-curricular entrepreneurial ecosystem here where the student can come and get an amazing education and prepare themselves for the job market with significant career opportunities, you will attract the very best here. Who will attract the very best scholars? Who will contribute the greatest ideas to your research machine? Who will drive your next big grants to Tri-Council? And your university will thrive from that investment and attention. But that's thinking at things very systemically and enabling yourself to go the full circle, such that 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, even allow yourself to think that far out. These companies will exist here. They will remember who helped them here. They will fund the next chairs. So the same thing goes for our governments. As we ask the universities and public institutions to think this way, our governments need to be thinking this way, and our institutional hospitals need to be thinking this way as to how it comes back around to impact them economically as a society.
It's a flywheel, right? And we just have to get the flywheel spinning. To support David's comment about commercialization, one of the CEOs that participated in the launch of our report last week talked about his research, development, and commercialization journey. And through research and development, his investment dollars were matched dollar for dollar by different government programs. But now that he's ready to commercialize, he commented that the attitude is, well, you want to commercialize, we're not here to help you make money. There's, all of the previous funders have stepped back. Now that he's ready to commercialize, he's on his own. But in terms of building a friendly ecosystem and culture, the Early Adopter Health Network is the whole fundamental backbone of the program is value and the quadruple aim. And we embed that from the outset of the program. And there's no expectation as hospitals agree to evaluate a technology with a view to procurement. There's no expectation that they're going to buy anything that's inferior. No company is going to be successful globally just because somebody bought their inferior product at home. They've got to be competitive from the get-go. They've got to be globally competitive from the get-go. But with that understanding, the Early Adopter Health Program is, we only launched in January. We've already got over 20 hospitals that have signed on to it. And I think the challenge for the healthcare system is to acknowledge that not every hospital wants to participate in this kind of work. But those that do embrace it and want to be part of it, and they're very happy with the outcome of an evaluation that establishes key opinion leaders in their hospital, helps them attract physicians to their hospital, because the physicians that want to be early adopters, that want to write papers beyond podiums, they want to work with innovation. They want to be affiliated with those hospitals. And one of the learnings for us is those hospitals don't just have to be in downtown Toronto. They can be anywhere in the province. And it's a great way for some of our community hospitals to attract leading physicians to their hospitals, to make them the offer that they can be part of technology evaluation and adoption, and be first to have their patients benefit from Canadian innovation, and it benefits the community. The benefits are profound across the system, that not everybody has to travel to the center for care, that people in their communities can get care and feel that they're getting the latest technologies. But we have to start somewhere, and that's why I say it's a flywheel, and it's part of the work that we're doing. But we are incredibly surprised that if you find the right hospitals, they want to be partners and they want to do this work.
So agree with you, Gail, that for finding the right partners, that's great, but that shouldn't be. I don't think that can be our approach in Canada. I think our approach needs to be one where we reward public institutions that actually engage in this activity, and that by the end of the exercise, by the end of the campaign, that the administrators know that this is the right thing to do. And it's the same thing on the speaking from somebody who's in the trenches and the grassroots of the startup field. The early days of this, even 7 years ago when we started H2I, it was a very tough PR sell to the Faculty of Medicine, not to some of its leaders, but across the whole unit, that this needs to be integrated into your curriculums, into your way of thinking and driving your business of educating. And this needs to be rewarded. And we're still very much on the early phase of the path. And I would argue it's the same thing for the hospitals. The hospital institutions, public institutions, rather, I'm not calling on penalizing those that don't, because I think they grew up in a culture and a mindset that seems to be very challenging to get out of. But for those innovators who are embracing your program, they need to be rewarded, and we need to engage these people to be able to teach other hospital administrators of the values, the humanitarian values, I guess the feel good values that you put out there on the table. But it has to be more than feel good values. There has to be resources that just drive and reward their efforts, and the rest of them will start to get the message.
Well,
Yeah,
David,
and that is part of the model, Paul. There is a governance model that, as part of the determination of value, the next step is dissemination. And I absolutely hear you. The executive teams need to be involved, and the executive teams need to sign off on their participation in this program. But it is a flywheel, and I absolutely agree with you regarding the rewards. But I do think that for some institutions, I mean, the early adopters to the early adopter program, you know, they're the ones that see the rewards of just being innovators. And of course, you know, there's some financial remuneration that we are able to provide for them to participate, to cover their costs and so on. But, you know, surprisingly, there's some hospitals that, at least now, at least in these early days, for them, that's enough. But I agree that the whole system needs to be rewarded for this kind of work.
the good news is I think they are starting to be rewarded. And this is what, there have been some home runs recently, and that have brought in tens of millions of dollars to certain hospitals. You know, this year, you know, there were 2 IPOs for over $250 million on NASDAQ of Canadian companies. Fusion and Repair. I think Repair is now a unicorn with $1 billion valuation. And then Blue Rock did exceedingly well. So I think what's going to happen, I want to be a little more optimistic. It's going slower than I agree with everything David said, and it's going slower than I would like. You know, I came from the American system, and I was, you know, Canada was a little, you know, came a little farther behind in terms of entrepreneurialism in this area.
Yeah, Cheryl, just while you're getting your out there, you're back.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where you lost me, but I think okay. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you now, Cheryl.
Okay. No, I think my only point was that we're now seeing some big wins, and I think that's the way things will accelerate. They went slower than all of us on the phone on this call would have wanted, but now that the best way to get this going is there are hospitals who are making big money. The others want me too, let me do that too. And I'm seeing more of a ability and openness to investing in these companies and supporting them and doing some of the things that David and you had suggested. So I'm hoping that between what was happening anyway on the innovation side and this COVID that's really brought home how important innovation is, I'm hoping, and again, this rapid innovation and approvals and a little grease here will continue, even, God willing, after we address the COVID issue.
I agree. I think there's a lot of optimism here to be talking about. I mean, the last 3 years we've watched these young startups in the Health Innovation Hub go from 9 million generation to 20 million to 45 million last year. That's quadratic in nature. So anybody who did well in math loves to see that kind of growth. The point is that we started low. The momentum is gaining. It's in the early days. And I think what the big message on the call here is we all need to be on the same song sheet to drive it, ensure that that growth continues, as you've said. And it's a very positive story right now. I think the goal is that we have to keep it positive, and it's got to be more than just goodwill and feel good about what we're doing.
So
in our survey, 47% of industry leaders said they were more optimistic about the future of the industry compared to a year ago. And I pulled the deals done off of PitchBook year to date. So this is PitchBook, but usually it's pretty good. Year to date in Canada, we've had $2.7 billion of investment deals.
Yeah, and Cheryl, when we seeded Fusion, we would have never expected that Canada Pension Plan would have jumped in as a crossover. So that is a fundamental change in financing in north of the border that we've been screaming and hoping for many years. Right. And so real change is happening. I do think you're right to be optimistic.
And you know what? My view is that if any pension plan here is not in biotech, and many still aren't, they're really missing a humongous opportunity. And this year should really have brought that home to them. So I'm hoping it won't just be CCPIB, but that the others will step up in a big way. And I think that will make a big difference too, in terms of the environment. So we're going to turn to questions from the.
Cheryl, you gave a big shout out to pension funds in the July article in the Globe and Mail. So hopefully they're all listening.
I also, right now, the government of Canada is making deals with drug companies so that if there is a vaccine, we won't be last in line. And they're making bets, okay, on several vaccines and making deals basically to make sure that we will have some priority. At the same time, as I mentioned before, there are new the reimbursement for drugs in Canada is likely to decrease vis-a-vis the US. So how does I can't put this together. Like, on the one hand, we don't want to be left behind with COVID. On the other hand, we say, you know what, we don't necessarily want to pay what the US will pay for drugs. So, but we still don't want to be, we still want to be at the top of the list. Now, in the US, corporations are basically, as a director, you are required to make of different goals. So tell me how you're.
It's a very exciting question. You never know what might come. Sorry, Cheryl, we can't hear you very well. We're missing some parts of it.
Yeah, we're good at predicting the future of entrepreneurship, but this is really tasking me.
Yeah. So Cheryl, is the essence of what you're saying, we can't have our cake and eat it too?
I'm sorry. I think I went off, and you'll excuse this internet. It's I need to call Rogers and have them ramp me up again. But I think, Gail, I don't know if you heard me before, but it was just sort of like how can we, on the one hand, want priority, and on the other hand, say we don't want to pay as much as other countries.
Yeah, well, I guess this is where I use David's line of "Don't get me started," and you know, I don't have an answer to that. The approach that we're taking in the work that we're doing is to make sure that the technologies that we're working with have fulfill a definition of value, and get the government groups that we're working with to agree that if there's a positive definition of value, that there'll be a pathway to procurement. The bigger issues at PMPRB are extremely complicated and extremely political, and I don't have the answer to that. And you know, that's going to take a lot of lobbying on the part of multinational pharma, and you know, their approach is one of those you know, don't get me started stories.
And by the way, I think though David had a possible approach, which is this just needs to be more coordinated, because one arm is.
It'd be great if it's that simple.
Well, just for what it's worth on the drug pricing, of course, you know, people may know that the U.S. Is the odd one out, more so. You know, they're the ones that are
To
paying.
deal with all these. I don't know, Joseph, you may have to ask some of these questions. My internet is not doing well. But there is a question about, in terms of, David, maybe you can ask this, you know, in terms of getting rapid approvals, it's great, but are we risking safety by going quickly here? And how best to balance how fast we should go, especially during this time of COVID, in terms of approvals?
Oh, well, that's a difficult one. I think that there has been some, including publications from the FDA themselves, regarding the importance of ensuring safety as part of the discussion, of course. And then things got Trumpian with some, you know, discussions about warp speed and how things would get approved, and that actually, as far as I know, the vaccine's coming in a few days by some records. So, you know, I do think that it is an inherent challenge to the system to really press the system and get, and it's more so particularly with a vaccine. You know, with other times you've seen accelerated approvals with cancer drugs, and you could argue, well, should they have gotten approval? And part of that rationale is that they'll be displaced by subsequent drugs and they won't be utilized to the same extent because they don't perform very well and the market will correct. That's not quite as easy to do with a large scale vaccine effort. So it's going to be a challenge. I think, you know, we have in the Canadian government acquiring multiple mRNA based vaccines that might need to be stored at -70. You know, the ones that are first approved may not be the most practical ones to be employed. So I think it's going to test the system in many ways, and you know, adding fuel to the fire, the anti-vaxxers, that some of these ones will be approved that won't actually be totally effective, and even ones that are effective are unlikely to be as effective, or like most vaccines, are unlikely to be effective across a whole population. So there's always going to be fuel to undermine either the regulatory or the actual concept of vaccination that will have to be managed by governments and healthcare systems. That's going to be a real tough thing to deal with, aside from just dealing with the pandemic.
I think it's going to be an excellent opportunity to observe and watch just how robust regulatory systems are with regards to their mission, with regards to their very first mission, their very first duty of call is safety to the public. If you look at the FDA, look at Health Canada, and others in the world, that is the first thing that comes into play. And they are all implementing various measures to be able to, cut the red tape element. But safety is, as far as I've seen, and in discussions with my colleagues and companies as well, going in the U.S., that the lowering of the bar in safety isn't a card on the table at this point in time.
To come
In
full
robust
circle.
systems, in
Right.
robust systems.
Yeah, Cheryl, you cut out, but you were asking a question about PMPRB, and here's an opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry to build some goodwill with the Canadian government, and that might help smooth over some of these issues that you were identifying that heretofore have not been addressable by multinational pharmas because of a lack of trust and a lack of goodwill. And if that can be restored, then maybe these dialogues can have some impact.
Do you think, by the way, that, I mean, it'd be very interesting if a drug gets approved in the US, but doesn't get approval in Canada, or if it gets approved in Australia and doesn't get approved in the US, it seems like there could be a lot of pressure from populations to get their government. It'll be very interesting to see what countries move fastest and what kind of pressures are then put on the government to catch up. Any predictions, Gail?
I think there's a lot of moving parts. I can tell you that for the Obio Investment Summit that's going to be held in February, our keynote is one of the leading thinkers on just this very topic. Because by February, I think a number of these projects will have advanced, and people will have some perspective on how do we make vaccines available to everybody, no matter what country you're in. But I'm going to wait till February and hear what the expert has to say on this.
Well, it seemed like we moved very quickly on cannabis, whether that was good or not. And it seems that we should be able to move quickly on something even more important. Paul, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
We are
I was just smiling at the cannabis one.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, that's, where there's a will, there's a way. But we are funding. The Canadian government is funding several COVID vaccine candidates. So they aren't putting all their eggs in one basket. They are, they are making a number of bets, and hopefully one of them will be the right bet.
And I'm not sure if the cannabis analogy is the correct one for this particular one, because we've been doing a human experimentation with cannabis for the past 50 years or more, and many of us were part of that experiment back in the days. So I think their approval on the marketplace is quite a different story than some of the very advanced science being done on biomolecular gene therapies that we're talking about here.
Agreed. It was so. I just thought I'd put a little. We never saw the Health Canada work so late at night as they did on cannabis, but they are working really hard. I mean, these are this government job 9 to 5. We see that they're working really hard also now, to their credit. So.
Yeah, and I just want to correct you. I don't think 9 to 5 is very fair. I think people in government work very hard, and I think through the pandemic, we've had a lot of indicators that people in government and even government agencies are working 24 hours a day almost to address this situation. So I don't think there's very many 9 to 5ers around at all.
No, and if I meant right now, they're working very hard during this pandemic. I agree. question from the audience as to whether, in your experience, you think there might be room for new approaches to expediting research to commercialization, other ways of approaching it. And David, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm on mute, or am I not? No, I'm not. You know what I think is just a quick aside about, the changes. I think what's fabulous for Canada is that all across the news for the last almost year have been all women leading the public health efforts, and people actually listening to them for the most part. And I think that's been a real nice change from, all the public health officers from most provinces are women, and that's been a great element to add to our healthcare discussion. So, one of the things that we're looking at with OICR is, we call it commercialization, but really it's also about adoption. Whether or not, in our case, whether or not it makes a big financial return, and how does it help patients with cancer. And so I think one of the things that we're doing at this Translational Institute is think about how do we, before we even start funding research, have a discussion with the Ministry of Health about adoption. And I think increasingly, I like to see that trend, and we're only starting it within OICR and Facet, but we've had some initial discussions, and I think it's important so that we don't have a model where we may have had it sometimes in the past, where good, well-intended researchers without the knowledge of adoption and healthcare reimbursement might throw a spoon over the fence to technology transfer when a fork was needed. And so part of that requires, without being adopting an entire venture capital model where you're only doing investing in research that is going to have an applied and reimbursable path, because that's awfully limiting. But I think one thing you can do is at least ask the question, if your research is successful, is there going to be a path for it to move forward? And if not, we need to start planning for it so it can be successful. So I think that's one of the ways we're trying to attack it. And I think there'll be other models that come up to de-risk this.
I think another strategy that we're seeing in the research sector that certainly didn't exist in the 1980s when I was trained as a PhD student is the push and the rewarding towards major collaborative teams that are being brought together with very different sets of talent. That early visionary on the hypothetical question of discovery, all the way to the translational thinker, and bringing those teams together. In fact, these models are now starting to crop up more frequently. They're starting to be rewarded within the Tri-Council funding bodies of the country. As this started to emerge, you can imagine the disruption that this created, the solo scientists no longer being competitive, despite how good they were, at the expense of the emerging, very collaborative, very information sharing team to drive forward the holistic path towards opportunities on translation. And our lab is located in the Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, and this model is being proven out so strongly now that you're seeing corporations starting to make significant investments. Look at the recent Tamerty investment of $250 million. They believe, they've known for a long time that corporations with big teams that work together do amazing things for society. And the research machine in this country is starting to move in that direction. And the faster we can move it there, the more efficient we're going to be at delivering very effective research that makes it into the commercialization realm.
So I can add a little story to support your comments, Paul. And but first of all, David, I'm so encouraged to hear that you're thinking about how are these technologies going to be bought even when you're working with research projects and that you want to advance, because I think that's exactly when we need to start those conversations. At the Obio Investment Summit in February of this year, we had an early technology showcase, and Ottawa University, Ottawa Hospital Research Institute, and CHIO all participated as part of the early technology showcase, along with others. But my story is related to one of the technologies. One of the researchers that attended talked about his research as part of the summit, talked about his aspirations to develop and commercialize this research, spent the 2 days of the investment summit talking to all of the investors there, learned from them what they would consider investable, went away and approached Obio just a month ago, and based on the input that he received from investors, he and his colleagues have spun out a company, and they're already well on their way to their first investor, because they learned how to start to think about the market and what an investable technology is, right from the get-go. And that's the difference it made. From February to October, they were able to, they didn't have to quite pivot, but they had to certainly pick another project from the basket of projects, and based on the feedback of the investors about which of the projects was the most commercializable. It wasn't their pet project, but it was the most commercializable. And the investors said, this is the one we'll invest in. You can bring your pet project along, but it doesn't have the potential that the one that they decided to go to market with does.
So we have some hard questions from the audience, which is how are they going to validate a vaccine or treatments when we still don't really understand the long-term effects of COVID? We still don't really understand. No one understands this disease. So how is this going to be validated? David and Paul, you're the scientists here. I mean, I know it's a very hard question, so I'm curious as to how you can answer this one.
It's a very good question, and one of the first things that's off the ground is that, of course, we're not only investing in vaccines. There is a lot of amazing science going on in the area of the inflammatory pathway on this, all the way over to the impacts on cardiovascular in the system. So it's a multi-pronged approach. There are a lot of research avenues that have opened up, which are addressing the spectrum of what COVID is. And I think they will all move in line. There are many forums, many symposiums being set up. There's Can COVID being set up, which is bringing together multiple facet discussions on the evolution of science. So hopefully, the pieces of science that need to come together to enable us to make the right decisions on given therapies, whether for treatment or for prevention, that they will be in sync together. And the only way to achieve that is to not shut down research in every other field for the sake of moving ahead of vaccine, but keeping these other avenues of research going, so that because COVID-19 is a systemic disease at the end of the day. People are dying for various outcomes associated with it, and we need to be making sure that we keep on funding and advancing all of those avenues. That's my perspective on it right now.
Yeah, I would second, this is a very complex disease, even though it seems like a cold virus cousin, it wouldn't be that different, but clearly the clinical manifestations of this disease are still evolving, and it's going to be a challenge. But when have we ever had such an enormous international effort focused on one thing? It's stunning to see it. And I think, as a two anecdotes I was thinking. One is actually within my own family. I was in New York in January and out in BC for a biotech event in February, and that was the end of my international or national travel. But we ended up having COVID come through our family, and I've got a couple long haulers that are still not 100%. They're doing okay, but they have this myositis, muscle inflammation that is really fatiguing them. So that's obviously not something that's going to read out in a short-term trial looking at symptoms in the initial response or the avoidance of those dramatic hospitalization symptoms. We didn't have anybody go to the hospital. It's just been a drag on us trying to recover. But I think, as Paul said, this multi-pronged effort to look at all sorts of different angles, the biology, the inflammation, the immunology is unprecedented. And I think one of the great things that we have among the many great efforts within Canada is even associated with the University of Toronto here, and DNA Stack is doing a lot of work to federate data and have data from international data sets be able to communicate with each other on a standardized process. And that is going to be beneficial to understanding these individual efforts to characterize therapeutics and vaccines, but also hopefully change in the future the paradigm for international research and how to coordinate it more generally. So I think we've got a long road ahead of us to understanding the disease and optimizing, but this is a great test of our research and health system, and I think it's going to hopefully bring more resources and focus on the value that we're creating.
Yeah. So Joseph, you put in the chat room that we should stay tuned for the launch.
Maybe you can just ask it, Joseph.
Challenge.
You're muted.
Yes, I see that. Stay tuned for the launch. So one of the things that our community, and I'm not just talking TRP or H2I or MITO, but one of the things we're working on is trying to get people to become more innovative in their thinking and starting at the beginning. So one of our projects that Paul alluded to is related to the health nexus, is the design nexus, and we're going to be working with people from across Canada, hopefully to spark innovation around improving health and care delivery. And so stay tuned. In the next month or so, you'll start hearing about the Praxis Challenge and how ways that you can get involved and participate in workshops and build teams and ideas towards launching innovative projects, including potentially companies.
Okay, and I want to really, this has been such an interesting conversation. I'd like to ask the panelists to maybe, if they have any closing remarks. And, we can't, as an American, I have to, of course, we have to be mindful of the fact that we may have a new president-elect tomorrow morning. We don't know. But how you think, maybe in your closing remarks, if you wish, to address how you think the election may or may not have any effect on the path to addressing COVID going forward. Paul, maybe we start with you. I thought I'd give a loaded. You may give, if you wish to give closing remarks that do not address that, we will permit that too.
Okay. At the end of the day, I'm a big believer on collaborative efforts for big problems. And the conversation we're having today is a big problem that knows no border and knows no political stripe. There is nobody who is escaping this, whether it's the current sitting president or possibly a new incumbent. So Canada will be working with those groups, trying to understand. We've seen it for the past 2 weeks, the discussions going on with regards to Ottawa, mapping out the two scenarios, and there will be a solution to go forward on either of them that will take into account COVID-19 and everything that brings with it. And that will be that. I think Canadian innovators have made great strides over the past 2 decades, and it's growing nicely, and they are very much entrenched within the American system, not only because it's part of their marketplace, but it's also where they find their investors, and also where they do a lot of their vendor support to support their own products. So I don't think any of that is going to change tomorrow. And with the speed at which entrepreneurship is the direction in which entrepreneurship and innovation is moving in this country, that will only accelerate. And there'll be pros and cons under either of these administrations with regards to the challenges with regards to ensuring that those opportunities exist. Clearly, in a no tax system under Trump, there's certain advantages, and under a more liberal approach to societal healthcare under a democratic government, there will be advantages and there will be disadvantages as well. So we'll adapt.
Gail, any closing remarks?
I think Paul summarized it perfectly, and in terms of what's happening south of the border. I think for Canada, the opportunity for us is to seize the opportunity, and as we've talked over the last hour and a half, the opportunity for the Canadian government to address the twin challenges, really, of capital attraction and driving adoption, so that we have the potential to become a global leader of innovation and production in healthcare. And it's our opportunity to exploit, no matter what happens down south, by tomorrow morning or the end of the week, whenever or maybe next month, whenever we know the outcome.
Thank you, Gail. David, you picking up
All right,
the rear
so
here?
I'll take a run at it and try to add to Paul and Gail's insightful remarks. I think in many ways, people can say what they will about Donald Trump in the last 4 years, but I think whether it's positive or negative, Canadians seem to have a pretty clear view as to where to land on that. But I think both, what's interesting is that both Trump and COVID have pushed the systems, political and healthcare systems, to an extreme that we haven't seen before. And I think that obviously the partisanship in the US is at levels we haven't seen before either. And I think maybe there's something in this process that is good. Out of something, maybe something bad comes something good, and that we've found questions about Obamacare and healthcare and health delivery are all good questions to ask. Vaccines are and their role. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic, even though I see those rallies with nobody with masks on, that cause for concern, that overall, in either case, moving forward, the whole system's been pushed and people are asking tough questions, and they may not get the answers now, but over time, we're going to benefit in the long run.
Well, I want to thank Paul and Gail and David for such an interesting conversation. I really learned a lot and really appreciate the opportunity to be part of it. And Joseph and Yasmin, I want to know, maybe you want to conclude with any remarks?
Yasmin, would you like to go first?
Hi there. Sorry, my computer also froze. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming to our session, specifically the panelists as well as Cheryl, our moderator. This was such a informative and amazing talk. Like, I learned so much. I also want to thank our attendees. The chat has been going off since we started, and I love reading everyone's opinions and questions and, you know, getting everyone's thoughts all in one session. I do want to take a second to thank TRP, MyTO, and H2I, Paul Santerre's hub, for presenting and offering this session to us. And we have another session coming in December. You will hear about it coming soon. And again, thank you so much on behalf of everyone here. Joseph, do you have any final words?
I'd like to thank Yasmin for helping put all of this together and all the hard work that she does to get the speakers and panelists coordinated and everybody to hear what's out there. These talks are really important for me because these days with COVID, I tend to spend most of my time in a basement in my same chair, my same desk. So these are my social activities, and this is my true news. So I want to thank Yasmin for helping out. I want to thank the speakers and panelists for coming out. Cheryl, you are a wonderful moderator. You were able to engage everyone, and thank you. I think that as a community, I think it's really important that we take time to think about some of these issues. And I hope that all of those students, researchers, we have a very diverse group this time, that you will participate in the future. But also, if you see a problem, if you see a need, go out there, solve it, innovate. We're here to help you.
Just echo the fact that was an amazing chat line here. I've been on a lot of chat calls since beginning of COVID. Haven't done a count on them, but this would have to be very close to the record of chat input from the audience. So fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I
Thank
hope
you.
everyone has a great week.
Good
Care.
job, Yasmin. Good job, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.